Roland. Meet you.
So nice to meet you. Yes, from Biodiversity.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Yeah, I think the whole thing has been really meaning for us to meet.
Oh, well,
Here we are.
here we are. We need more than 2 minutes.
Awesome.
We're good.
I have met Roy. No, I've met him in Roy.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sabrina Bartel, and on behalf of Stora Enso Wood Products, I'm delighted to welcome you today, physically or virtually via live stream. I'm covering up for Claire O'Neill, who was supposed to do the moderation, but she's sick today, unfortunately, so we will have her colleague Roland on the panel, and I will do the moderation. I am very honored to host this session on this very special day, so the Cities, Regions and Built Environment Day from the COP26 this year. We hope we can bring some light into an industry that is very young in participating in the climate debate. The construction industry is responsible for approximately 40% of global energy-related CO2 emissions. If it were a country, it would be the third biggest emitter after China and the USA. With a global growing demand in housing, megatrends such as urbanization and fast construction, they are in focus. At the same time, this requires solutions that are not only fast to build, but also sustainable and can provide a healthy environment for the people. So, we're at a tipping point in history. Construction has not seen structural change since the Industrial Revolution. But today, we have the chance to make a difference. But how? This is why we're here today, and I'm very happy to introduce you to our high-level panel of experts here on stage and virtually. So virtually joining is Joe van Belleghem as Senior Director for Real Estate at Google. Then I'd like to welcome Christina Gamboa as the CEO of World Green Building Council, Elizabeth Chege as CEO of the Web Limited Group from Kenya and also Chair of the African Regional Network. Covering the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, I'm happy to welcome Roland Hunziker. And then welcome as well to Neil Martin as CEO of Lend-Lease Europe. And last but not least, Lars Völkel as CEO of Stora Enso Wood Products. So, I'd like to start right with the question of our session title. How can construction contribute to solving the climate crisis? Joe, please share your views first from Google.
Hi, everyone. I'm honored to be here today. At Google, we set a moonshot goal to operate 24/7 carbon-free energy by 2030 in all of our data centers and campuses. A major focus of my team's role is integrating sustainable and just practices into our Google-led ground-up office developments that we're designing and developing, including our mixed-use districts in California that include housing, retail, community, and placemaking. Now, from an environmental perspective, our team is focused on 4 areas. 1, accelerating carbon-free energy. As an example, our Charleston East and Bayview project have installed over 90,000 dragon skin solar panels that are aesthetically beautiful. In our Bayview project, we have over 365,000 linear feet of geothermal pilot reducing carbon. Further, all our new ground-up office developments are being built as all electric to facilitate a 24/7 transition. Second, water stewardship. For that geothermal system, we will save over 5 million gallons of water per year. Plus, we're installing a recycled water system. 3, enhancing biodiversity in our projects at system scale, whether that's tree planting, bioswales, creek, or wetland restorations that will drive wellness and act as a carbon sink. And fourthly, advancing circular systems by eliminating waste, reducing materials, or addressing embodied carbon. For instance, at Bayview, we are on track to divert more than 85% of our construction waste, including working with the local drywall manufacturer, and recycled over 1.5 million pounds of drywall scraps into new product. And then from an carbon perspective, we have 3 mass-built timber office buildings under construction in California. One opening in 2022 with a dramatic reduction in embodied carbon as compared to traditional practices. And of course, there's many other benefits from mass timber. Anyways, these are just a few examples of what we're up to.
Great. Great. Thank you for those insights. And Neil, how does Lend-Lease tackle this challenge in the industry?
So those that aren't familiar, I mean, I think you've all heard of Google, but if you've not heard of Lend-Lease, just to give you a little bit of a background, I promise I won't take too long. We're an Australian company, pipeline of about Aussie dollars, 115 billion, all in major urban regen schemes in 4 continents, America, Europe, Asia and Australia. And they last anything from 10 to 30 plus years. So, and they're built environments, so large scale urban regen, houses, homes, communities, retail, offices. So clearly, you know, it's very important that we tackle this with our partners. So that's who we are. Why is it important though? Is because we've set an ambitious target, and you know, I've been hearing some amazing things here today. But Lend-Lease has said we're targeting to be net zero on scope 1 and 2 by 2025, so 4 years. But the big challenge for us is we're aiming to be absolute scope 1, 2 and 3 by 2040. And herein lies the rub with this, and I've said this previous today, is that 90% of our emissions, Lend-Lease if you like, is in scope 3. Right? And in scope 3, you've got to think about the products we use, so aluminium, concrete, timber, glass, and then you've got to think about the energy that our customers use, so homeowners, offices, retail. And while we don't own that, we create that. So we're both a developer, contractor, investment management, and investment management. So we basically develop, build, fund it, and manage it. And if the built environment is 40% of global emissions, right? Big problem. Therefore, we're in an industry that's a big problem. So we need to be a big part of the solution. And scope 3 is where I think the jackpot is, if we can get there. But we won't Lend-Lease, as good as we think we are and, you know, as big as we think we may be, we're not going to get there without working with people like Storenzo. So, you know, I'm sort of, you know, giving a flag, and with Google as well, because we're working with Google over in San Francisco. Whether you're a client in the case of Google or with Storenzo here, you can only work with them by finding new ways to build things with different products. That's going to be the trick. So whether we use timber, and if we use timber and replace a ton of steel or a ton of concrete with a ton of timber, that's a 1.5 ton reduction in carbon. So it doesn't take a lot of maths to work out. Clearly, we've got to get on with timber. Doesn't mean we're not going to use steel and concrete, it's just how you embrace it and use it. So I think that's what construction's challenge is how we actually collaborate. And it's, you know, great to work with Google. Lend-Lease Americas are working with Google on 3 huge schemes, you know, about whole life carbon. It's great to work with Storenzo here. We've got other partnerships, Responsible Steel, as we try to find ways to remove that embodied carbon, because that's going to be the trick for the industry, and that's why I'm quite looking forward to this panel.
Yes, thank you. Lars, please share your views on this challenge.
So firstly, I'd like to just echo what Joe and Neil have been saying. I think this, you know, this theme of this COP is all about acting now, and you can only really act if you are acting not only within your sector as industry leaders, so Google is an industry leader, Lend-Lease is an industry leader in construction and development. We are an industry leader for renewable materials, but the only way how we can really make a change is if we work together. So here in that case, Google wants to have sustainable buildings. Lend-Lease is able to make that happen, and we as Storenzo, you know, are able to provide those sustainable wood engineered solutions from a sustainably managed forest. And only if we act together, take an initiative and not just talk about it, then I think we can make that change happen. And if I just dwell a little bit, of course, a bit biased on the wooden part, but I still believe that wood, as simple as it sounds, is still very much underrated, not enough discussed solution to this construction challenge. As Neil already said, 1.5 tons of CO2 are removed from the atmosphere for every cubic meter of wood. We also know that working and living in a wooden environment improves your health and well-being. We also know that investing into this industry will create jobs in rural areas close to the forest. There's many, not only environmental benefits, but there's real tenants benefits and also social benefits for creating jobs in the right area.
Thank you, Lars. We've heard now insights from more of the end of the supply chain, a bit backwards. So Elizabeth, you're working for a consultancy for construction in Kenya. Do you have a view on how the industry can contribute to solving the climate crisis?
Yes, definitely. Thank you, and I'm glad to be here. So the industry itself, especially looking at Africa, we have a great opportunity to start now. We haven't built 80% of the built environment that will exist by 2050. So this discussion around wood is very important. But we're very careful not to mention wood because it's very emotive. Back to the late Professor Wangari Maathai, who encouraged people to plant trees. Every time you talk about wood, people think about raw wood. So what we're referencing is engineered timber. And we'll also talk about CLT. So currently in Kenya, there's a CLT prototype, first one, that's in Kenya, that will be launched in December. But even to get the paradigm shift on the thought process of wood, moving away from a country that's around 50 to 60 years old, the process was that people are thinking about cement and steel as modern buildings. So we still have that paradigm shift to really get people to understand that engineered timber, commercial forests, as you mentioned, we would start planting them now. But also it gives the green jobs. And land is another emotive element in Africa. So combined with all this, nonetheless, the long-term strategy is that net zero carbon must be met. Jobs must be available. Water, as well as carbon, is a very important aspect around this. And wood is also linked to agriculture, because if you're planting trees, who's planting the agricultural crop? So I know I've opened it up, but there's great opportunity on the same side because infrastructure, buildings, we have a deficit of over 2 million residential homes as of 2019. You can count how many that is. In Nigeria, it's more than 4 million from 2019. So we either choose to build correctly or we end up with bad buildings, as Christina's mentioned before. Thank you.
Thank you. As you were talking as well about this paradigm shift, I think this perfectly transfers our talk to the World Green Building Council. So, Christina, what is your organization recommending?
Well, I think the nice thing we've seen at this COP26 and that we're seeing in this panel, it is about deep collaboration. So actually, I am not recommending. We are recommending. We're hearing one voice, one ambition after several years, and it's a time to say that we're rising to the challenge. What you have just described from Google, Lend-Lease, and Stora Enso is the deep collaboration that is needed at the business level. That deep cross-sector collaboration enables the needed market transformation. It gets the right demand signals. They're asking for disclosure, transparency, right? Performance, measurement to get us to have the carbon accounting we need to drive forward business certainty in this path. But of course, with this, we need bolder regulations from government. So we need to scale up this sort of examples we're hearing today. And that's why today here at COP, we announced the upgrade of the net zero carbon buildings commitment from World GBC that now goes into whole life carbon. So that will give the right signal to, for example, these sorts of initiatives, because we're calling for front runners. The World GBC's net zero carbon buildings commitment is a front runner in the race to zero. So that's an important one, and we have 44 signatories of that commitment. So 44 companies with $85 billion in turnover is an important message that we're giving out today. That is real leadership. And of course, we're complementing this industry action with policies, with policy signals. So we have the Building Life project, and we're convening industry and policy leaders at 10 national European countries. We have here French GBC, HQE with us. UK GBC launched today its whole life carbon roadmap for the UK. And that means that we're behind the path forward. We need more political will in this sort of leadership. And I think with that combination of that unlocking that ambition loop is the way construction industry will step up with what we know is already good practice.
Thank you for that. Roland, what does the World Business Council for Sustainable Development suggest to tackle this?
Thank you for having me. And again, I'm here on behalf of Claire O'Neill, our managing director, who unfortunately was ill today. I'd like to pick up from what Christina has mentioned, the whole life carbon and the commitment that you have updated to include the full life cycle. So this is really good news, because as we say, the built environment is 40%, and for a long time we have talked about energy in one corner and about materials and industry in the other corner. But if we really are to decarbonize, then we need to look at that full life cycle. And I would like to talk a bit about the data and transparency that we need to do that. It is only if we do whole life carbon assessments that we are able to address all the trade-offs that are there between energy efficiency, increased potential embodied carbon from materials, and also looking at the full life cycle. Buildings are complex, they also need to be refurbished, and there is emissions in there as well. So let's look from the very start of any project at that whole life carbon. We did some work supported by AROP with our members this year on just publishing 6 whole life carbon case studies, and it was very difficult to find the data. I'm calling to everybody to give us case studies if you have. Many people do give them, but they're not really full whole life carbon case studies. And we're using the EN standard for that, life cycle assessment as we know it, as it goes into EPDs. It's a transparent framework, and you need to fill in all the boxes. So you have the materials and construction, then you have the energy use, and you have the end of life. And by doing that, we are really able to then understand how do we drive to net zero. Because we have to do it at a performance level. We have to compete on performance so that we can reach net zero. As WBCSD, we are material neutral. We believe all materials have a role to play in the transition, and we see commitments come out of many sectors. The Global Concrete Group has come to the COP with their net zero roadmap. The timber sector is a very big solution for us going forward, but all materials will help us ultimately on the way. But it has to be performance-based and whole life cycle.
Thank you for that, and thank you all so much for your first contributions. I think we have now understood that it's time to act. So, Joey, I would like to get back to you. You as Google are involved in large-scale environments all over the world. How does that influence your thinking on addressing carbon? And also, you mentioned mass timber. Why are you focusing on that as a key building material?
Yeah, first of all, location, scale, and mixed use is very important. For instance, in our planned mixed use district in San Jose in California, known as Downtown West, it will consist of about 7.5 million square feet of office, 4,000 residential units, 25% of which will be affordable, retail, community, and public spaces. But it's located next to a major rail hub that's being upgraded. Further, in all our mixed-use districts, we're investing significant funds in new pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, connecting to regional networks. And we're working with Lend-Lease on these districts, and as part of that, they're developing over 15,000 residential units on our Google lands. And they're very committed to using products like mass timber as a way of reducing embodied carbon and lowering the cost of housing to individuals. Further, residential gives people the ability to walk to work, whether that be office, retail, or those who are providing essential services in our communities. Sorry, where was I? In addition, if you look at the scale of what we're doing, we're putting in these massive district systems for heating and cooling, recycled water plants, microgrid systems, solar and storage at scale. But we're looking at these districts, we're not really just looking at the environmental considerations, we're focused on social issues, in lifting the economic well-being of the community, but also creating economic replicable solutions. So to give you an example, in the San Jose project, we spent countless hours with local equity groups, environmental groups, labor, business groups, city staff, city officials, in collectively coming up with a solution that had broad-based support by the community and led to 11-0 vote by council to entitle the land and to allow us to deliver on the project. And that project has significant environmental commitments into it, but what I'm really excited about is it also, as part of our community benefit package, is a $200 million community opportunities and pathways fund. And that's a fund dedicated wholly to social equity issues like homelessness or affordability, creating pathways for those underrepresented in our community. And it's just a great example of, when you work together with the community, that you simply make the pie bigger, so that things like environmental, social, and economic issues, those slices of the pie get better and everyone else does better. And of course, timber, we love timber. I mean, timber has that biophilic effect in our workplace. It improves our well-being. I love the fact that it's made in a safe, controlled environment offsite, because I believe that's going to create a lot of opportunity for those in the industry, single mothers, single fathers. It gives them the ability to work in a controlled environment, predictable hours, predictable locations. And it's a great training ground for people to come into the construction industry.
Thank you, Joe. I think that's a whole new level of integrated construction and how you can see that. Let me now turn to you, Neil. In your initial statement, you also mentioned that Lend-Lease has some very ambitious targets. What is it that makes the leadership decide to be so bold on climate action?
So really, I would say, Lend-Lease has always been its founder was very socially minded, Dick Dusseldorf. So there's a culture of that, and I think many companies have that culture. And so that's part of it. But we went through an exercise, particularly in 2018, which was striking for me. So I don't know if people have heard of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. Really trips off the tongue, that one. But the reason I raised that is because what it required you to do was create 4 scenarios. It required you to create up to, at least 3, and they had to be scientifically backed. We created 4, from a 1.5 degree global warming to 4 degrees. And then you sort of work it through on your business plan. And 200 of us took part around the world, executives, but it was science-based. So if you say, well, it's 4 degrees, what happens? And there was things about how much coffee was lost, how much ground we could no longer grow coffee beans, or forest, or population movement. And when you get into that level, it's like, oh, really? Sea levels, what actually does that mean? If it is sea levels at this, how much land do we lose? So it was quite stark, and we had this 4 degree scenario. And I think as a business of building buildings, contributing 40% to these global emissions, I think that was quite a big moment for a number of us. We really, really got to start now. And I think that then sprung into these ambitious targets, and because people always say, oh, it's a long way away, why are we talking about 2050? And I understand that, but we're not. The view is we've got to get there net on 1 and 2 in 4 years' time. So that's a pretty big challenge. But in some ways, we control that bit. We control how much red diesel we use. We're using hydrated vegetable oil. Everyone's heard of that? Brilliant. Just drop it into your plant. You don't have to change the engines. So that's 90% reduction. So there's things like that we can do. But we know, as I said at the beginning, 90% of our footprint, if you like, is stuff that we don't actually manufacture ourselves, or the energy we don't use. And I know it's important to measure, and I'm really keen about how you measure. But sometimes in the back of my head, I worry if we could spend too much time, and my view is we've got to get going. It's important that we get going. And I don't want to turn this whole into a timber thing, but one of the things I think that I really think that needs to happen is you look at different countries, and everyone's got different regulations and rules about how we measure it, or are we measuring net, and what does net mean? If I only offset, 2%, is that good? What am I actually doing? So we're not clear on that. We're not clear on what embodied carbon is. We don't quite know how to measure that. And I think, that does need sorting out. But I think companies, and this is where I come from, we could lose a lot of time if we're not careful in that space. It is important, don't get me wrong. But as a company perspective, I just need to make sure that our products are starting to change. And if it's timber or if it's high recycled aluminium that we're using at the moment, it's an amazing product. It's got to help, right? So I'm very keen about getting the balance between the two and really driving that change. Because there are products out there. I think what does hold us back sometimes, I don't want to, it's regulation. The ability to adopt new products to satisfy regulations can be a challenge. You know, and I think that's something we need to think about as well as how you measure it, how you do it. Because you've got to measure it to know you're improving, I get it. But likewise, I'd like to see our industry make some steps about production.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. And I think everyone knows that such ambitious targets cannot be set and reached alone, but with partners. And as you mentioned before, one of them is Stora Enso. So what is Stora Enso's views on those ambitious goals? How can this be done in the future?
So firstly, to also support Elizabeth when investing into CLT and also, you know, developing this as a local business and with local jobs and with locally sourced products, but also to talk about, you know, what Neil was saying, making it happen and not just wait for regulations, which of course would really help. Maybe I'll do a little bit of, you know, simple math for the building that you, Joe, and Lend-Lease, Neil, built in London, right? Your Google headquarters were built with mass timber from us, and they saved up to 5,000 tons of CO2. And that wood grows back in less than a minute in Austria, for instance, right? So it's simple math. You know, it's not so complicated, and that's why I think, you know, how can we make those, you know, ambitious goals happen? Frankly speaking, I don't think it's the problem sitting in this room. I think it's the problem that we, you know, need to spread the word. This is not rocket science. It's not only about wood. There's other materials as well. But to change the way of working in construction is probably a bigger challenge. You know, measurements and full life cycle views help, but we are a change-resistant industry, and we are risk-averse, and we just overcomplicate stuff, which in my eyes, it doesn't need to be so complicated. It's proven. Wood, for instance, performs almost regardless of all those stupid building codes city by city, right? It performs the same way. So, but we spend hours and hours and decades to discuss if and how and where it should be performing like this or that, where I just call for also COP to really, you know, really simplify that and not overcomplicate, you know, to make a real change.
Thank you. And Elizabeth, for you, how would you see it? How would the solution look like for the African continent and the next 10 big cities?
Thanks for that. So some of the elements that we did with the prototype was actually to get people in there. And BuildX, the company, got some data back. And the first instance was we thought people would be scared of the building, the mass timber building, because of fire. The issue was actually cost. And when we talked about cost, the financial market doesn't understand the material. The de-riskers or the insurance doesn't understand the material. So it's being put against high carbon materials as well. So for the industry itself, I think there's a lot of awareness. These prototypes need to happen. We need to, it's fantastic what Google is doing, but I'd like to see more of it in Africa, especially with COP27 being in Africa. We want to show what's happening in Africa between now and then. There's skills transfer, not just the financial element, there's the jobs we've talked about, but there's the skills transfer. And it's not the traditional sense of business as usual, send loads of kids abroad, then they come back, if they come back. It's actually, how do we get the skills from the learned areas? You've got a lot of experience, Google has experience. How do you come to Africa and impact over 100 through maybe 5 of your people? So it's a great opportunity. It's not a challenge, it's a great opportunity to relook at a clean plate of skills, people, impact, jobs, carbon, and everything else that I mentioned before. Thank you.
Thank you. Christina, the World Green Building Council, what is that recommending that is needed for changing the carbon industry or the industry from carbon source to a carbon sink, actually?
Well, I think the market is solving that one, and we're getting more clarity, right? And it's been changed a step, let's say a big change in terms of acknowledging embodied carbon as a big problem in the room in the construction industry just 2 years ago, I guess, no? Since that report in 2019. So I guess there has to be two things in my view. One is the radical transparency in the accounting of the total impact of the project, right? Because then we can know what the industry actually can mitigate now, and possibly with the solutions that we have now, if there is residual emissions, how to enable that they are offsetted, but we continue to invest in further decarbonizing the built environment and learning to do it better. Then we can talk about true carbon sinks. Of course, there are already carbon sinks like mass laminated timber. However, it is market-specific also solutions, right? And so it's about the full performance of the building, right? And then I think what we have to figure out as an industry is how to enable and we create those markets for total accounting, for how to measure the data sets coherently across markets, and how to enable that conversation so policymakers can give the right policy signals to go further in that direction. Like, for example, what C40 does with the Clean Construction Declaration. That starts, cities can then move further in terms of the procurement and help us decarbonize and not wait for big, complicated policies. So I would say that's a pathway that I envision. I know it's hard, it's a direction of travel, but this conversation is what it's going to enable us to scale up in the next few years and get to having emissions by 2030.
Thank you. Roland, as part of the WBCSD, what are you recommending your members to make a change in the construction industry?
Before I get to that, let me just quickly reply to the
Sure.
data issue and measurement. I'm not meaning that we should data crunch forever, but I think the issue is that the measurement of whole life carbon aligns everybody behind the same target. And while there is still issues around exactly which methodology to use, let's not keep that from making progress, but just be transparent about it. But it is really important because that helps us choose the best solutions from the supply chain. And maybe to your point, Elizabeth, if we then start adding the cost of that carbon, no matter how you put it, but many companies are starting to put the cost of that carbon next to it, it starts changing. You may not have a carbon cost in your market. Actually, most markets don't have it. In Europe, we have an ETS, but it's actually on industry. It's not on the final building where maybe it should be. There should probably be a carbon market that addresses that. And that maybe goes more to your question. It's about ultimately the design process, and to your point, how the industry needs to change for that collaboration. So the radical collaboration is among everybody. It's across industries, but it's very much along the value chain, so that the solutions you have or another material sector have, you can discuss them with those who design and ultimately those who pay for. Because a lot of the reductions in carbon from materials come from the choices you make and how you design them in a holistic way.
Thank you. Thank you all for those very interesting statements. And since we've come quite far regarding the timing, I would like to ask one last question, official question, where I would need maybe a short answer from each of you. And that is, what is the one thing that needs to change now in order to make a difference and help solve the climate crisis? Joe, please go first.
Yeah, Google believes companies should embed climate action in their products and services to drive decarbonization. So in terms of one thing, wouldn't it be fantastic if the entire building industry, developers, contractors, and suppliers signed on to an ambitious goal of embracing a 24/7 carbon-free environment by 2030. That way, the materials we use in building are carbon-free, how we build is carbon-free, and how the buildings are operated are carbon-free. Now, this would require a change of mindset from the industry of not focusing solely on first cost, but understanding this kind of systematic change would spur innovation and significantly reducing operating savings, making materials less expensive, how we build less expensive, and how we operate our buildings less expensive and benefiting the end users. And I think the entire industry could do really well from doing good if they put their mind to it. And the more that the industry joins in this effort, the better the economics will become, the healthier our planet and our communities will be.
Thank you. Neil, what is your view?
Yeah, very much like Joe, because I've been here all day in the Built Environment Day, and everybody, right, to a person, is aligned around taking action, making the stance, setting ambitious targets, and I just wish, my wish would be that atmosphere, you could bottle it, we go out, and we walk outside the doors, and lo and behold, our environment is in that place. But I sort of know that's not the case. And so I suppose my wish is that a number of us here today carry on pushing really hard and work harder together. Because if I'm in the supply chain, it's hard to change, right? It's expensive, it's difficult, it's awkward. Where's my supply? Are my customers going to buy it? We need to give them that confidence. So big companies like ours, and Joe's just said that, store owners, we've got to give them that confidence. They've got to change, and we will use their products. We've got to help them to change. That's what I think, what I'd ask for is, everyone here today to continue push and be bold, be brave, because without that, I just, it's going to be even harder than it already is.
Yeah, that is correct. Lars?
To build on what you said, life cycle-based assessments of buildings that are fair and comparable. If that becomes relevant, we make a big step forward.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
I think for my part, definitely will be on the part of, with Africa itself, having the finance in place. There's percentages of finance that's talking about this 60-70% will be resilient finance. We haven't got time for that. It needs to be 100% because with the right finance, we see a huge difference in Africa. So I'm looking at finance and the insurance companies. Thank you.
Great. Christina?
Yeah, I think we're taking that on from other sessions that we heard today, huh? Oh my, I think one thing that's in my bucket list is really asking that the finance community asks whoever they fund in this sector, that they open up true accountability, their portfolios, that they show their leadership in carbon accounting in a fair, transparent manner, and that we ask insurance companies to help us step change to future-proof, right? And get all the money that needs to go into the infrastructure sector, be aligned with systemic thinking and delivering solutions that are good for people, but have their carbon accounting sorted. And that brings on the fairness, the transparency, the accountability. That's what needs to change, and for that to happen, it's collaboration. We don't. It's not carrot. It's not stick. Sorry, no. It's not a penalty, but we do need to stop funding bad infrastructure.
Thank you. Roland?
We need more Googles and Microsofts and Facebooks who really are pushing the market to deliver better buildings, because ultimately it's also a demand side issue. Such a fragmented industry. And so this is a call to basically WBCSD member companies. We have such a big footprint as a global network. All companies take net zero targets, and the buildings they occupy, the logistics centers, the supermarkets, everything they run is part of that. And I think the accounting is happening at the moment. So also from the commitments from the finance industry, when you look at the asset owners, they're currently taking those commitments and what does it mean for our real assets. And I think that's how we create and that demand. And we need to all start doing that today. It's really that demand that has to happen. And maybe also in Africa, in Asia, where all our companies have also a footprint. Let's face it, we're still building these steel and concrete skyscrapers where we shouldn't. we exported the design from Europe to tropical countries, and I think we need to find a different way of building with more local materials, more what is around, and especially adapted to that climate, and not closed boxes and an air conditioning to cool down to 18 degrees. So it needs a massive change, but I think we can really start, and Joe is smiling because his company is driving that. We need more of your companies to mobilize. Thank you.
Yes, I couldn't agree more to that. Dear guests in the audience, if you have any questions, we have now time for a few. Could someone maybe go with the microphone? Neil, can we borrow your microphone?
Oh, sorry.
There's a scar.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this interesting discussion. My question or comment will be open to everyone because I think we're all here in this room for a reason. And I would appreciate your insights. I'm currently working on a very exciting project in Saudi Arabia. We're building a city from scratch that's going to be the size of Belgium. It's called Neom. And Neom is going to be a home for more than 1 million people. So we're talking about massive infrastructure, a massive built environment, and our goal is to be carbon neutral by 2030 and then carbon negative thereafter. But the big elephant in the room is our build-up period, the period that goes between now until 2030. A lot of emissions will be associated with, for example, having to rely on diesel generators or construction machinery and equipment that will be powered by diesel. Why? Because the grid currently is not green and we don't have renewable energy infrastructure, particularly in that remote area. So that's a huge, let's say, opportunity to reduce our emissions, but it's also a big challenge that we're really struggling with because we're not just talking about imported material, we're talking about the actual physical act of construction that is going to be ongoing for 10 years. And you mentioned a great point about exporting material because we don't have local green material right now that we can use in building. But then again, we don't want to rely on a lot of exports because the emissions that will be associated with the transportation of those imported materials is going to be massive as well. So I'm just putting my challenge out in the air and hoping for anyone to come and provide us with solutions. I'll be sitting here until the end of the session if everyone can help out.
Yes, thank you. Maybe that's not a question we can solve now. Or, yeah, you would take it.
I'll take the opportunity to join you with that question. It's the same thing. When we talk about the next 10 megacities being in Africa, we're really looking at that whole Middle East and Africa region. So we'll be more than happy to see how we can work together towards finding the solutions, especially from the World Green Building Council side, the Africa Regional Network and the Middle East Regional Network as well. Thank you.
Great.
And maybe from my side, just to quickly add to that, firstly, wherever possible, we support sustainable forest management locally, of course. That's the first priority. But then it's important to also know that wood is 70-80% lighter than concrete, which means you need only 20% of the truck deliveries, give or take. So whilst the transport may be longer, you need many less. So overall, actually, the environmental impact is not as bad as you may think now. And most of our sawmills, for instance, are close to the ocean, so it's sea freight, which also is not the worst thing, versus, for instance, road transportation. So let's have a look at the CO2 impact of transportation. It's not too bad.
Great. There's another question in the room.
I'm Elizabeth Valencia with the International Real Estate Federation, and I'm wondering, I have not heard anybody speak today about hempcrete. Hempcrete is fireproof, it's carbon negative. I've visited a winery in the south of France. They never have to condition the air, winter or summer. It keeps it the exact right temperature. It's been used extensively in history. It also offers agricultural opportunities for the local community. It can be developed and created locally. And hemp is also a very vertically integrated property material that can create paper and textiles and CBD, pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals. China has the rage on the vertical integration of this, but why not?
Who wants to take
Well,
it?
I guess firstly, since I'm probably the most biased ones towards wood, I think it's very important that we're looking for renewable materials, whatever and wherever they come from. And today, in Europe, less than 5% of all buildings are made, for instance, from wood. And so we all have room to grow. This is not one company within the timber industry against each other, and this is definitely not one renewable material against the other. There is full support for whatever renewable material we can use. We just have so much room to grow, but we don't fast enough.
Neil?
Yeah, I would pick up on both questions. I think the underlying question's the same with both. So, there are solutions to using red diesel. Don't even have to change the engine. There's a drop in fuel. There's telehandlers now that work off batteries, right? So we've got these solutions. We're using these solutions. So slightly, we've just got to get better at sharing. Hemp I'm not familiar with, but there's many products out there that we're just all of us collectively aren't familiar with, like high recycled aluminium. It's an incredible product. Glass recycled. There's so many things that are going on. And part of the challenges you hear today is somehow we not quite all joined up with all the great benefits of these products and how we use them. So there's a big challenge there. And I think also plays to another point, which is it's not sometimes our own domestic rules and regulations get in the way of us adopting things. And I think that's a challenge that governments really need to pick up.
Roland, did you want to add something?
I especially was intrigued by your question on NEOM and also the 10 or many more megacities that will go up in Africa. I think you start in the right way. You're setting yourself this ambition and these targets. You may not know now how you get there, but I think that's where it starts. Because again, it's the only way you then ask those questions to those who can bring you the solutions. So by starting there, probably you need the best consultants you can have, or maybe a group of them. There are many of them who really understand this fully. And then why not, maybe if you want to make it a flagship, assemble a larger group, because we are all biased. So if you just work with one, you will get that solution, but maybe assemble a larger group. So why not in WBCSD, we have companies from all along this value chain. Maybe there is a conversation we can have, starting from your ambition. Well, how do we actually do this in different markets? That would be quite exciting, actually.
Great, thank you. We have more questions in the room. I just wanted to mention that there is also, for the virtual audience, there's the Slido code. Maybe we can shortly show that on the screen, at least for those joining virtually, that they can enter questions online. And then please, you're next.
Thanks for the great discussion so far. It's actually a two-part question. I have the impression that technologies and the opportunities, they are already there or well within development and so on. So we have all these great solutions. But especially in the building industry, as one of the hallmark conservative industries almost, it's very hard to transform it in this way. So it's not just about providing the material, but also about the architects, the standards, the knowledge for these groups, the city planners. So it's a lot of educational process, but also showing which are the promising opportunities there. So kind of as a question, how to approach that side, to kind of move this far quicker than just sort of having in 10 or 20 years time some standards emerging there. But also, in my impression, the skill set for actual construction workers really changes a lot, because it's more complex building materials and so on. So it's not anymore kind of almost a hallmark job of sort of unskilled or blue-collar workers, but you suddenly need much higher educational levels on the construction sites. So whoever wants to address one or both of these questions.
Thank you. I'll take some part of that comment, especially around standards. One of the issues we have with the standards is they're outdated by the time you're using them. But we have professionals who are stuck with using the standards because of regulations. And that's the issue we have in Kenya, in Africa. There are projects being designed now that will be ready in 2025. There won't be net zero carbon, definitely, because they're using outdated standards. But then if we wait for the regulations, that's going to be another so many years. So it is actually this group, us, to really rein on, and that's why we keep talking about finance, putting that text of performance, transparency, that can actually twist that dial. But also the professionals need to sit at the table and know that they have a handprint element, not just footprint. The handprint impacts on carbon in other areas as well. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Christina, do you want to add something?
Yeah, well, I have a dream. And it's as we go into all this campaign we did at this COP around Race to Zero, Race to Resilience, right? As countries step up in their ambitions and their policies on delivering on net zero, hopefully that will trickle a signal also to people that are have also the decision-making programs of curriculums, of trainings, right? And then they will catch the flag that there has to be this sort of training across all disciplines early on. Yes? That also has come from our movement, yes, from the World Green Building Movement, the Green Building Movement. The GBCs around the world, the 72 GBCs, come together and work with universities locally, work with other stakeholders, and make that happen. But it has come more from business to the university, yeah, business innovating this sort of leadership, and then going back to universities and universities keeping up. We need universities to be more progressive on the clean energy transition. We need them to be progressive in electrification. And I just wanted to say, I think it's not about technology. If you look about the gray, net zero buildings can happen now in any geography, and it can be an affordable housing project in Brazil. We have a great virtual pavilion for COP26. I encourage you to look at it. There's a favela in Brazil that is net zero. What is it? Great passive design, but it goes to dealing with energy poverty of people that just didn't have access. And then you have people with more money in their pockets. So it's about doing things right, stopping bad decisions, bad designs, bad buildings, integrating the sorts of competencies as you do at this high level of entrepreneurship, right? And I know you must have social responsibility programs that trickle down and open for others to join the journey of integrative design, better decision, better urban planning, and hopefully Race to Zero and those design and those policy signals will help the value chain say that we need buildings to be the next electric vehicles in the next COP. It is transforming. It just needs us to step up and tackle all fronts. It's very diverse, but I agree, but we all can do something about it.
So can I just add a bit to that? Because I think, so this is...
Just a very bit.
I love, by the way, I love architects, so if there's an architect in the room, I think you're fantastic and wonderful. But here is a problem, right? Architects design, and then we try to put the products, try to...
Put it closer.
A bit closer.
We tried then, so I love architects, in case you didn't hear that, but the problem is we design to a brief, and then we try to find products to fit that, right? Here's what we really probably need to do, and we've got a thing called Podium. You take the products from your supply chain, and you then design according to those products. So you take the products that have low carbon, different properties. It doesn't matter whether that's steel. You can have low carbon steel. I mean, the work that Responsible Steel are doing is fantastic, as well as timber and everybody else and hemp. You take the product, you then design. And I think you can design digitally as well, by the way. I think that's the future. I'm hoping that's in my lifetime, that you'll see AI and digital designs coming off the back of products, because that's how you make change. At the moment, we're trying to get products to fit a design.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have time anymore for more questions, but I think for those in the room, we can discuss after the session. But thank you all for those very interesting cases and statements. I think I would take on with me two main points that you all made, and I think you can all agree on, is that the national and subnational governments around the world need to adopt a life cycle approach to the reduction of emissions from buildings and ensure that embodied emissions get addressed from the early stages of planning and building design. And then on the other side as well, that businesses in this industry commit to radical collaboration across the value chain in order to develop, promote, and adopt sustainable building practices that achieve the reduction of embodied carbon in buildings at scale and without delay. So in order to be all in for 1.50. I'm now thanking you all for listening and participating in person. I'll now hand over just briefly to Lars for some concluding final words. Thank you all for participating. I wish you all a fantastic rest of the day and a successful COP event.
Firstly, I think that this was an engaging panel, but maybe a little bit of a boring one because we were quite more or less on the same page. But we're talking here about 11% of the energy-related global carbon emissions, 11%. And this is one room and we talk about it, but we make so little progress in the last years. So that's why I'm happy that we had so little disagreements here. I really thank all of the participants for joining. And I really ask, all of us to spread the news that, building in a new way, in a more sustainable way is possible. It's proven, it's not rocket science. And that we all come in to make that change happen together faster. Thank you.
Thank you.
And maybe last point, I forgot. Sorry, you already gave me the look. We will put it together, all your statements, in a position paper, which we will publish tomorrow. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Joy, for joining virtually from the West Coast very early today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.